Hi everyone and welcome to this new Twinmotion tutorial. In today's video we are going to have a look at the new configuration feature, which allows you to visualize variants of your project in real time. For this tutorial I'm going to use this kitchen scene created by Tianmin, one of our power users. This new type of media can be found by going in the media dock and heading over to the list icon in that bar over here. The first thing you will need to do is to select the type of configuration you want to create. So I'll click on the three dot button here and it asks me what I want to create. Let's start simple and create a material switch configuration. I'll click on the plus to create my first configuration, which contains by default a first state. I can head over back to the list of configuration by clicking on that icon, and here I can see the first configuration I've already created. I'm just going to rename that kitchen floor because that's the first configuration I want to create with you. Change the set of material applied on that kitchen flooring. Let's select back our configuration here. Right now I have a first state that memorizes nothing. What I need to do is do a change in my scene based on the configuration I have created and click here to create a second state. So let's do that. I will head over to my user library where I've set up a few material for this tutorial. I'm going to use this floor tile here and I'm going to drag and drop that on my kitchen floor. Now what I'm going to do next is simply click on that create new state button. This will create a state number 2 that memorizes that on that mesh in my kitchen. If I select it here on that kitchen floor mesh, the material applied to that mesh has changed. So on state 2 it uses this new material and retroactively it will say that in my first state it has that tile material. Let's do that a couple of times. So I'm going to drag and drop this one and this one. So now I have 4 different materials applied in my kitchen floor. I can select them by clicking on each thumbnail, but you may have noticed that at the bottom of the viewport there is a trigger icon over here. When you click on it, it will switch from state to state. You may hear a small sound when you are hovering the trigger and when you are clicking on it. If that disturbs you, you can go to the Preference panel by clicking on Ctrl P, Appearance, and disable all sound by unchecking this option. So now let's head over to the Property panel of our configuration to see what we can do with our trigger. So at the top here you have the list of modified property within your configuration. So we have created a material switch configuration, and if I expand that, I can see that I've modified the material applied on the kitchen floor geometry. Here I have the trigger. The trigger is the interactive button that will allow me to switch from the list of state I have created. And here I have all the settings related to that specific trigger. First thing I want to change is the trigger icon. Here there is a few icons that is natively present inside Twinmotion. So here let's say I want to use that color palette because we are changing the material applied to that floor. The next thing I can do here is change, for example, the opacity of the trigger, the color or the size. I like to leave everything by default here. What I can do now is switch to a list. That means that when I will click on that button, it will open a list from where I can precisely choose the state I want to use. But right now that list is empty. It only has those white thumbnails. That's because I need to load or create my own thumbnail. So let's over to an area where I can see well my material, like that. I will click on my first state, I will click on the 3 dot button and I will click on Capture Thumbnail. This will capture a thumbnail directly from the viewport. I'm going to do that a couple of times and for every of my states. So now I have a nice thumbnail. Let's head over back so we can see the whole scene. And now when I click on my trigger, it opens a list of thumbnails and I can precisely choose the material I want on my floor. Bear in mind that this refresh button here doesn't recapture automatically the thumbnail. This will refresh the change you are doing in the scene. And I will talk about that in a future configuration we'll create together. So let's say that we are good to go on this first configuration. Let's now create a second configuration. Now what I want to create is a configuration of visibility. As you can see here, you can multi-check multiple types of configuration, but in most cases you will create a single type. Here I want to create a visibility configuration, so I will just check visibility, I will click on plus. Just to keep things clean and organized, I'm going to rename it right away that to stools. Select back my configuration, here I have a few stools. So let me come to my scene graph, I'm going to open my configuration folder, stool, and here I have 4 different folders, one for every design, every stool present in my scene. So what I will do now is hide my first folder, unhide the second one, clicking on that create state button, and I'm going to do that for all my stools. So now I have 4 states, one for every stool. I can use this same technique here and capture a thumbnail of the different shoe, but what I did is to place those different stools in a simple lighting scenario and create some image. And now I can use the load thumbnail to load a custom image I have on my disk. So that's what I'm going to do now. So here's my 4 different thumbnails I have created. I'm going to load the first one on this one, I'm going to click on the second one, load thumbnail, third one, and fourth one. So now I have 4 different thumbnails. Same scenario here, I'm going to switch to a list. And at each time I will click on the trigger, I will expand the list and I can choose the stool design I want. Here there is by default no icon that suits my need. But here, if I want, I can load my custom icon, my custom trigger icon, by clicking on that plus button and loading a texture. Here I already created my own trigger with my stool icon. So here now I have my nice icon with a stool. When I click on it, I have the list of thumbnails I just loaded. Let's now quit media mode and click on that full screen button. When you click on full screen here, that's where you will display all your configuration at once. So here you will have the first configuration with the materials of the kitchen floor, and here the second one where we can play with the stool design. Let's create a few more configurations together so we better understand all the different types of configuration you can create inside Twinmotion. The next one I want to create is simply the ambience. So I'm going to uncheck visibility, check ambience, click on plus. I'm going to rename that ambience. So that first state will be what we have currently in the scene, the daylight scene. But what I want to have is in a second version, in a second state, create just a night scene. So I'm just going to change the time of day to something on the night, so it's just way darker. And we click on the plus button to create a new state. So here we start with the state 1 during the day, second state, it will be the night. If I come and expand this option, here we can see that I've only modified the time within that configuration. That list of modified properties is for your whole configuration. Let's say I want to change something else. Maybe in that second state I want to maybe change a bit the north offset so we don't have the moonlight coming on that setting here. Can just change that a bit. And now what I need to do is to refresh those changes, because if I just click back on my state, it will apply that state, which just has a modification of the time of day. So as soon as I'm doing a change, like changing turbidity, atmosphere, adding some clouds, or changing the north offset, I will need to to just click on the refresh button. Here I've modified a bit too much thing, so I'm going to click back on my state 2 just so we are back with our default settings, and I'm going to change again just the north offset and click on refresh. So that's going to be my day and night configuration. For that I'm going to just maybe use this icon. What I want to do next is to create a configuration where we can turn on and off some light in the scene. So for that I'm going to play again with the visibility. It can be done in a couple of different ways, but for this first example I'm going to do that with a visibility configuration. I'm going to click on the plus button. So now what I want to turn on is, let's say, the lights over my oven here. So I'm going to come to my light folder, kitchen light, and here we have just a simple light that I'm going to turn on, and I will click on the plus button. So here again, when I click on it, it will turn on this light. This specific light, what I want to use first is, let's say, that on-off button. And now I want this icon not to be in 2D, not to be on the bottom of the screen. I want this icon to be in the 3D space. That's where the location option will be useful. I'm going to click on 3D object. This will place a trigger in my scene graph that I can grab and move anywhere in my scene. To move it, I'm going to select it. I'm going to press on Shift and click on the geometry. This will align that trigger on the geometry I've placed my mouse against. But you can also simply move closer to it and just simply use the gizmo to move it exactly where you want. So in that scene I've placed just a light switch next to where I wanted that light to be enabled, so I'm going to place the trigger just in front of that light. By default, the 3D triggers are always facing to camera. So as you can see here, when I'm turning, it will face the camera. And in a lot of scenarios, that works well. Personally, what I want in that specific scenario is to have that trigger always in a fixed position in the world. So I'm going to come to the Details panel. I'm going to uncheck the Facing Camera option. I will select back my trigger, and when I open the XYZ option, I can precisely orient that trigger. So typically, I want to reset the rotation it has, so 0, 0 and 90, so it's just facing, not facing myself anymore, it's just aligned with the wall here. And now what I can do is also move it closer to that light switch. So now you may see that, okay, we don't see the light switch anymore, but we have something for that. We have what we call the fade trigger. When you check that option, the trigger will disappear and it will fade in as the mouse gets closer to it. So here, when my mouse gets closer to my trigger, it will appear and it will allow me to click on it to turn on and off the light. When you are experienced and when you know well your presentation, you can actually make that trigger at a 0% visibility, which will allow you to click here and just turn on your light, switch from state 1 to stage 2, without having any trigger visible on scene. That will allow you to have a very realistic scene without any kind of visual helpers. But of course, you need to be very precise and know well your presentation and where you have placed your different triggers. When you are within the Twinmotion editor, where you have the toolbar and the dock everywhere, when you click on it, it will automatically select that trigger so you can move it around. But of course, when you are in full screen mode, here, when you will click on it, it won't select the trigger, you will just click on it and activate the different states. So now let's again come a bit on the back and see some of the things we just did. So again, we did our configuration of materials. We did our stool design. This one will switch to the night. And now we can turn on the lights. Let's now exit back that, and I will come back here and create a new material switch configuration to show you how to fix an issue if you have a problem with your file. So here I'm going to create a material switch, and what I want to change is the wooden countertop, and I want to have maybe a simple marble like that on my second state. So state 1 is wood, state 2 is marble. The problem you may have noticed is that my cutting board here had that same material. So when I drag and drop a material from my library onto my mesh, it override on all the previous mesh. The wood has been overridden by that new marble. And typically I don't want that on my cutting board. To fix that, here I will come to my list of modified properties. And here I have my cutting board, which is the mesh here that should stay in wood. So what I simply need to do is to remove the cutting board from my configuration. So to do that, I can simply click on the bin icon to remove the cutting board. So now that cutting board is back to its default state, which was that wooden material, while the other mesh have still that marble material on them. So now again, I can safely switch from state 1 to state 2 and the cutting board is not affected. The last type of configuration is the most versatile one, is the configuration of properties. What we call properties is actually all the property panel that we have in Twinmotion except from the ambience. So again, if you select ambience, here within that property panel, if you want to change anything like that, you will need to create a configuration of ambience. But any other property panel can be tracked with the property type of configuration. So let's create a new configuration. I'm going to name it, let's name it furniture. And what I want to change is simply the color of my furniture. So first state will be that green color. Now what I'm going to do is select my material picker, click on the furniture, and again, all the options here in that property panel can be tracked in a configuration. So I'm going to simply change the color. I'm going to switch maybe to a white, click on OK, click on plus to create a new state, and now I can change from state 1 to state 2. Let's create a third one. Selecting again my material picker, I'm going to create a dark black almost text color. I'm going to click on plus. So here we just change one material. What I want to change is also, for example, the oven here. So I'm going to state 1 will remain green like that, I'm fine. State 2, I'm going to again pick my material picker, select that material, and I'm going to just switch that to something gray like that. I'm going to click on refresh again to memorize that change on that existing state. Same thing on state 3, by default is that green color, so here I'm going to again select that and switch to a darker color and press on refresh. And again, now I've created a configuration of property where I change only the color of two materials. Another example of configuration of property will be for animators. So let's create a new configuration of properties, and here I'm going to press G on my keyboard to show all the visual helper. And here I will select my animator. Here I'm going to click on play to play it, and here I will click on plus. So this memorizes that in state 2 the play is on, while in state 1 the play is off. So now I can just simply open my drawer like that. Same as what we did before, I can switch to a 3D object, I can align it over the handle, I can make it not facing the camera if I want. But what I want to show you lastly on this configuration, let me a bit collapse my whole scene graph so we can better see what we are doing, what I want to do. So facing camera off, I will select back my trigger, I will make it not facing like that. So now it's not facing the camera anymore. What I want to do is to link that trigger actually to the drawer, because right now if I click on it, the trigger, as you can see, remain in place. So let's first localize our translator, which is over here. Now what I simply need to do is select my trigger and move it as a child of my animator. So when the animation launch itself, the trigger will be animated in the same way. So now if I click on it, the trigger remain in place. And of course, again, that trigger we can enable the fade trigger, so it's not visible by default. Change the icon to use a custom icon, and now when I mouse get closer to it, I can open the drawer, as simple as that. So that's about it on how you can create your configuration, but now let's check how you can use them. The first way to use your configuration is by simply clicking on that full screen mode here, and here you will see all the configuration you have created. But you are not limited to that. Let's head over to the image. I will select an image I have already created. Now what you can do is head over to the image tab. At the bottom you will have the configuration, and here you will have the list of all the configuration you have created. That's where naming properly your configuration will become very important. Here I've left everything named state 1, state 2, so it will be a bit hard to sort what is what, but at least I have the name of the configuration itself. So for example here I have the kitchen floor at the top. So in that specific image I can choose which material I want to apply on my floor. So I can choose, for example, the second material. And I know that the last configuration, one of the last configuration we did was the furniture. So if I want my white furniture, I know it will be that state 2 here. And when I do those changes, it's automatically refreshed in the thumbnail, and I can export this image with that selection of configuration. This works also in video, sequence, panorama. With a limitation with video and sequence where you can't apply a configuration of ambience or visibility, but this is something we'll work on in the future. Let's now create a presentation together. So I'm going to head over to the presentation, going to click on the plus. Here I will load a first image. What you may notice is that on the right here you can choose what type of interface element will be present in that specific media inside your presentation. By default, the phasing group will be present inside that image, but you can choose to enable the configuration. When you check that, by default all the configuration will become available in that media. But you may choose to disable some configuration. So for example, maybe when you plan to do your presentation to your client or coworker, you don't want in that point of view to be able to change the time of day. So we can hide the configuration of ambience, and we can hide all the other if we want, and just say that in that specific point of view we want to focus on the material of the floor and the stool. And then later on we can add another image where we could just focus on opening the drawer and playing with the furniture color. And of course, when you will switch to full screen mode, here once you have selected the list of media, per media you can have different type of configuration available. And that's it for this tutorial on the new Twinmotion configuration feature. Hope you like it, and we'll see you soon for the next one. Bye everyone!